Lundgren. Red Scorpion.
All right, that was a clip from the trailer, the iconic film Red Scorpion, produced and co-written by my guest, Jack Abramoff. Jack, obviously people know the most about your career as a lobbyist. And in the book, you talk about that. You talk about the system being fundamentally corrupt. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is your diagnosis of why the corruption's there. What is, to the extent that Jack Abramoff was able to thrive in this system, what were the preceding conditions that made that possible?
Well, I think the conditions that made it possible for me to thrive and people who played like I did, as opposed to the normal lobbyists, you know, who's out there just trying to promote the merits of their case in a way that is legitimate to congressmen, is the introduction of money. What frankly I call bribery in the system, which is the conveyance from lobbyists or their clients of financial benefits to members of Congress or other public servants. And that's what gave me and the team who worked for me and scores of others access that's not normal to members of Congress and their staff, and enabled us, frankly, to be in the room to convince them of the rightness of our cause.
There's sort of two aspects of that. You talk about in the book. There's the kind of trinkets, right? Mm-hmm. There's the box seat at the Redskins game, and there's the dinner at Signatures, the restaurant you had in Washington, D.C. And then there's the campaign donations. Mm-hmm. Which of those are more corrupting?
They're both corrupting in a different way. The campaign contributions is a sine qua non, frankly, for lobbyists who are trying to gain a certain level of access to members of Congress. Members of Congress have to get reelected. Their leadership tells them they have to get reelected. That's what it's all about for them. Wow. And they have to pay off their debts and get there. And lobbyists are there with checks in hand. So a member of Congress's day is taken up 24 hours, or taken up every minute. So anytime you can free up part of the day, meaning they don't have to raise money somewhere else, you're a benefit to them and you gain access and they're going to listen to you. So that's why contributions are very important there. In terms of the trinkets and all the rest of it, that plays particularly with the staff. Meals, golf, travel, and all the rest gives you access to them. It creates a friendship with them so that when the time comes that you have to talk to them, they don't want to do something to hurt their friends. You're playing off of the fact that human beings, normal human beings, are grateful for good things that happen to them.
If I could add,
please.
It was interesting when after, I left the Navy after 30 years and then went to Congress. And those who went to certain committees were those who had most raised money for the party. So if you wanted to be on the Energy and Commerce, Appropriations Committee, Financial Services Committee, it wasn't the heft of your background substantively that you brought, it was how much you had raised. For example, I was a freshman and I wanted to be on the Small Business Committee. They create 80% of all jobs in America. I not only got on it, but I got elected as vice chairman. I thought Congress wanted to show that it had a sense of humor, but it wasn't that. Right. There's no PAC money on the whole for small businesses. And so who wants to go there? And so there's this magnet to go where money can flow, which gives access, which isn't wrong. It's the undue influence from that access because you know that money's come from someone.
You know, one of the things that happens in the conversation about money in politics, particularly in Congress, is political scientists will say there's a whole literature, robust peer-reviewed literature that says money does not affect outcomes. And I've had this conversation with political scientists. They will say, there's a bunch of studies and money does not affect outcomes. What's your response to that?
I think it's nonsense. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, look, not just money affects outcome. Anytime you do something for somebody else, deep inside them, if they're a normal person, they're not some psychotic, deep inside them, they're going to start feeling gratitude. Yes. The moment that gratitude, and by the way, we want that in society in general. We want people to be able to...
Or we should just elect psychopaths to Congress.
Well, one would argue we have, but not certain exceptions, of course. But, we want in society, we want to give and get, and we want to get along with each other, not when you're a public servant. The minute that starts and you're a public servant, it's bribery. It's not called bribery. It's impolite. I'm being attacked like crazy for calling it bribery, but that's what it is, and that's the problem.
Yeah, please.
Well, I did a piece on John Boehner back in the 90s, and I had found out that he was actually handing out checks from tobacco packs to members of Congress on the floor while the House was in session. What I was never able to find out...
While smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, exactly. What I was never able to find out was what made him feel so comfortable doing that at the time. And was this just aberrant behavior, or was this normal?
No, I have to tell you, what makes Eleanor Holmes Norton comfortable leaving a message on somebody's answering machine saying, look, I'm chairman of the committee. You can't believe you haven't given me money. You want something from my committee? Where are you? There's an arrogance that sets in, not with everybody up there, but with certain of them, that they just don't care. They feel they're above the law, that there is no law, that basically this is accepted behavior. And that's the problem in Washington, that this is accepted behavior, and that's got to change.
It can also have a real undue influence on taking a strong position. So, for example,
yes.
I was a brand new Congress member, and this group called CARE, which had to do with the relationships between the Muslim community and other countries and Americans, had been placed on my schedule. I didn't even know it. It hit the internet. Boy, everyone from Majority Leader and everyone says, you can't go and talk to them. But some of them were in my district, U.S. citizens. I went and spoke. But when I looked at those who did not agree with just speaking with them, the impact in my following election was well over $500,000 that would not come from those who had taken this position that, hey, at least let's talk with them.
So you were cut off from money, you're saying?
Without a question, because you've taken a certain position. And so this is enhanced with talk shows and the internet. You take a strong position, and man, it can really have a big impact upon you. And so I think that is part of the self-protection or self-survival that unfortunately influences our politicians, and why you can add to the deadlock that's down there.
But you have some sensible, even radical proposals in your book. I mean, the idea that people who serve in Congress should not go through that revolving door and lobby. This book, in your journey of repentance and trying to de-link from your unsavory background, what are you going to go on the road? Are you going to take this to the country? Are you going to be speaking out? Are you going to go to Washington and be a prophet, unarmed, disarmed, forearmed for these ideas? I mean, what is the plan here in addition to just publishing?
Well, I'm working with the reform groups. Many of the groups, by the way, were the most critical of me and bashed me the most. I reached out to them. I'm trying to help them organize themselves to get something passed. Ultimately, if something doesn't get passed, it doesn't mean anything. And I was very much, when I was a lobbyist, a bottom line guy. How do I get something done? And so I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to speak on college campuses and anywhere I can, frankly, to let people know what really goes on there, and to speak it bluntly with truth, saying, look, this is bribery. Yeah. Okay, call it what you want. This is what it is. We have to do something about it.
Talk more with Jack Abramoff and about the role that money plays in politics on Capitol Hill right after this. Back with Jack Abramoff. I want to clarify, because people are asking on Twitter about the profits from this book, and I think people have a deep moral sense, and I think it's an accurate one, that there's something fundamentally unjust if you are rolling in the dough after what you've done, and right. We're here and you're going to sell this book. Right. The court. The money goes to the court, right, and they then give you a certain percentage of it.
In essence, yeah.
And they take it for restitution.
Yeah.
Right? I want to talk. You have a theory in the book. You're a free market conservative, right, from your youth, and then you went in and you worked in the bowels of government, sometimes making government bigger, oftentimes making government bigger, sometimes making it smaller, right? I mean,
well, I never worked in the government, but
no, I'm saying as part of your lobbyist.
I worked on the government.
Right, you worked on the and I don't think there was a lot of times there wasn't a ton of ideological commitment to what you were doing. You sort of were on one side, but in terms of fidelity to this sort of free enterprise system, you have an argument in the book that basically big government is the problem that produces this system of corruption. You say a senator drops a photo frame on his foot, and then he wants to regulate picture frames, and then that becomes a political battle, and then legislators have to regulate it. And it strikes me as pretty self-serving to basically have a system in which you think government is not good and corruptible, then go into lobbying and corrupt it, and then come out on the other side and say, look, government is totally corruptible and corrupt, we should shrink it, right? I mean, it's striking to me that there is no part of this journey you've been on that has made you think about what your ideological priors were beforehand.
Well, I don't think that my desire to have less government is necessarily inconsistent with where I'm holding right now. If anything, I lived under the auspices of the government for 43 months, entirely under socialized medicine and everything else in prison.
Yes.
And it showed me, frankly, even more that I don't believe that government necessarily can offer good solutions to things. But
well, prison services are a different thing, and I would agree with you that our prison services are not great. But continue.
But I think it's hard to argue that the expansion of the federal involvement in our lives has not produced more work for lobbyists. Lobbyists love it when there are new programs, and that's the point I'm making, by the way, in the book, which is that the expansion of the federal government has created the reason for why there are 30,000 lobbyists right now.
But I think it's really important not to lose sight of the way that norms work, because the fact is we have a comparative set. We could look at OECD countries, and we could look at how much regulation and how much government there are in those countries, and then we can go to Transparency International and see who's ranked as most corrupt. Right. And guess what? The countries at the top are countries with much larger shares of GDP as government than the United States. Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, countries like this. So it's just simply not the case that regulation per se, increase of government per se, produces a corrupt system. The norms matter. The norms in a culture matter, and to the degree that you were part of destroying those norms, there's some personal responsibility there.
Let me address first the point, and then we'll get to the pejorative. But I think in terms of the, one could theoretically have an expanded government without the corruption. I think that you see that in some of these countries where the culture is more aligned to the more nanny state mentality. Whether it's a function of America or whether it's a function of the entrepreneurial aspect of lobbyists or whatever it is, America, and probably a lot of it is a lot of the rules that we have versus, by the way, the rules that they do have in Europe in terms of some of the interaction with lobbyists. Sure. I can't see how you can look at the creation of new programs and not say that it's going to at least engender more business for lobbyists. I mean, I don't, whether it should create corruption is a different thing.
But the important issue here is you're saying there's money in the bank, and that made me steal it. I mean, I talked to a group of 70 naval officers the other day, and I said, you know, I was a congressman, but the chief of naval operations was actually a lobbyist for a special interest that didn't want his pie to shrink. You said earlier, lobbyists aren't bad necessarily. It's the money that influenced. So fix the issue with public financing of campaigns or something, but don't say government creates this problem.
No. I think, first of all, again, I don't know, maybe I'm doing the math wrong, but as a former lobbyist, I'm just telling you how lobbyists think. When you see a new program and you're a lobbyist, you're thinking, how can I get some of that program? And by the way, there are lobbyists who don't think that way, but unfortunately, they're not successful lobbyists in this system, which is part of the problem of the system.
But at the root of this is what your former colleague, Grover Norquist, I believe you're all part of the College Republicans, and he did some unsavory things according to your book, but he wants to drown government in the bathtub. What you are also talking about here is part of the problem in exposing the kind of work you do leads to cynicism and anger on the part of millions of Americans, rightly so, because they feel government is rigged against them. The fight needs to be to reclaim government, reclaim it for the people, strip the money out of it, and find a way so that it works for the common good and leave people the idea they can make change.
That's a perfect
I agree with you.
I hope your revelations.
I completely agree with you.
Good. That's a perfect segue for the story of the week that I want to get to next, which is about a legislative fight that's happening on Capitol Hill right now. And believe me, there's lots of lobbying going on around it. My story of the week right after this.